The year is 1274 BC. Beside the Orontes River, on today's Syria-Lebanon border, the two greatest empires on Earth collide. Nearly 6,000 war chariots thunder across the dust, the largest chariot battle the world would ever see. Thousands die before nightfall, and every machine on that field rolls on the same humble object spinning under your car right now. That was 1274 BC. But the wheel story begins almost 300,000 years earlier, and what took it so long is the real mystery. Our species is old, almost unimaginably old. The oldest bones we can confidently call Homo sapiens come from a hillside in Morocco called Jebel Irhoud, and they are roughly 300,000 years old. For nearly all of that time, hundreds of thousands of years, human beings hunted, farmed, buried their dead, sailed boats, wove cloth, cast metal, built cities, and invented writing. And in all those years, not one of them rolled anything anywhere. We had sailboats before we had wagons. For nearly 300,000 years, every heavy thing a human being needed to move was carried, dragged, or floated. That is the backdrop you have to hold in your mind. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The wheel is not obvious. There is no wheel in nature. Not one. A biologist at the University of Chicago once pointed out that the only thing that truly rotates on a free axle in the natural world is the tail of certain bacteria. Every fork, every lever, every tool we ever made was copied from something we could see. A forked branch, a pointed stone. The wheel had no model. Humans had to imagine it out of nothing. And the round part was never the hard part. Anybody can picture a log rolling downhill. The genius, the thing that took 300,000 years, was the axle. To make a wheel that truly works, you need a fixed axle with a wheel that spins freely around it. The ends of that axle have to be almost perfectly round and smooth. The hole through the wheel has to fit snugly, but not too snugly. Too thin, and the axle snaps under the load. Too thick, and friction locks the whole thing up. As the archaeologist David Anthony put it, this was an all-or-nothing machine. Get any single piece wrong, and it simply will not roll. You couldn't build it in stages. You needed sharp metal tools to carve those fine matching holes, and those didn't become common until around 4000 BC. That's why it waited. And where did someone finally crack it? For a long time, the answer was the potter's wheel in ancient Mesopotamia, around 3500 BC. But a striking 2024 study in a Royal Society journal points somewhere stranger and darker underground. Aerospace engineers and a historian modeled the problem and argued the first true wheels may have been born around 3900 BC among Neolithic copper miners in the Carpathian Mountains of southeastern Europe. Down in the tight, straight tunnels, miners hauled ore on log rollers. Generation after generation, they whittled those logs thinner in the middle, until all that was left was a slender axle with a disc at each end. The mine itself did the shaping. And here is the tell. Archaeologists have found more than 150 tiny clay mugs shaped like four-wheeled carts, decorated with the woven basket patterns of miners. People were making souvenirs of the wheel. That is how much it mattered to them. The oldest surviving wheel we have ever pulled from the ground makes the point better than any argument. It was found in a marsh outside Ljubljana, in Slovenia. It is more than 5,000 years old, and after all that time, it still had its oak axle attached. Someone shaped that axle by hand, with copper tools, and got it round enough and smooth enough to spin. That is not a caveman's fumbling. That is precision. They didn't know the word engineering. They had no mathematics, no written language, no science. They did it anyway. But a wheel in a mine is one thing. What happened when a whole civilization got its hands on the idea? That is where it stops being a tool and starts becoming power. The civilization that turned the wheel into an empire was Sumer, in the flat river country between the Tigris and Euphrates, modern Iraq. The Sumerians didn't just spin clay on it. By around 3000 BC, they had bolted wheels to axles and built carts and wagons. And suddenly the arithmetic of civilization changed. One man dragging a sledge could move a sack of grain. One man with an ox and a cart could move 10. And when you can move 10 times the food, 10 times the brick, 10 times the copper with the same labor, you can feed a bigger city, raise a bigger temple, and field a bigger army. Those first wheels were not the graceful spoked rings we picture. They were solid, heavy discs, usually 2 or 3 thick planks of elm or oak pegged together into a circle and wrapped with a leather tire so they wouldn't split apart. They were slow, but slow and tireless beats fast and human every time, and we can actually see what they did with them. On a small inlaid box from the royal tombs of Ur, known today as the Standard of Ur, and dating to roughly 2600 BC, there is a parade of war carts, solid-wheeled, pulled by onagers, a kind of wild ass, rolling straight over fallen enemies. That is the oldest picture we have of the wheel at war, and notice what it means. Within a few centuries of inventing wheeled transport, human beings had already turned it into a weapon. The Sumerians eventually standardized these wagons, turning the cart into something like the shipping container of the ancient world. A repeatable, predictable unit of hauling that an entire economy could be built on top of. A king who controlled the wagons, controlled the harvest, the labor gangs, and the war machine all at once. The wheel didn't just carry goods to market, it carried supplies to soldiers, stone to monuments, and tax grain to the palace. It became the circulatory system of the first states on Earth. Control the carts, and you controlled the food. Control the food, and you controlled everyone. But the Sumerian wheel was a workhorse, heavy, plodding, earthbound. Far to the north, out on the open grasslands, someone was about to make it fly. North of the Black and Caspian Seas, on the vast steppe near the border of modern Russia and Kazakhstan, a little-known people we now call the Sintashta culture were living hard lives in fortified towns around 2000 BC. They mined copper, worked bronze, and buried their dead with their prized possessions. And in some of those graves, archaeologists found the oldest spoked wheels ever discovered. This was the leap. Instead of a heavy solid disc, the Sintashta wheelwrights carved a light rim held to the hub by slender spokes. They cut most of the weight out of the wheel and left only what carried the load. Then they hitched 2 of these light wheels to a small platform, harnessed a pair of horses, and built the fastest machine on Earth, the war chariot. Some later versions weighed as little as 75 pounds, light enough for one man to lift over his head. The domesticated horse was the other half of the equation, and the steppe peoples had that too. Muscle plus a light wheel. That combination was as disruptive in its day as the printing press or the smartphone would be in theirs. Picture what it meant on a battlefield full of foot soldiers, a stable rolling platform, moving faster than any man could run, carrying a driver and an archer who could rain down arrows and wheel away before anyone could lay a hand on him. It was the tank of the Bronze Age. And it did not stay on the steppe. The technology rippled outward in every direction, carried by traders, raiders, and migrating peoples who almost certainly never grasped what they were handing the world. Within a few centuries, the chariot was in the hands of the Hyksos in Egypt, the Hittites in Anatolia, charioteers in northern India, and the Mycenaeans of Greece. That quiet innovation on an obscure grassland, a lighter wheel, seemed like a small thing at the time. It wasn't. It rewrote the balance of power across 3 continents, and it put nearly 6,000 chariots on the field at Kadesh. So the whole world raced to adopt the wheel. Almost the whole world. Because on the other side of the ocean, some of the most brilliant civilizations who ever lived took one long look at it and said no. Here is one of the great riddles of history. The Maya, the Aztecs, and their neighbors in the Americas invented the wheel and refused to use it. We know they invented it because we found the toys. Starting in the 1800s, archaeologists digging in Mexico kept turning up little clay animals, dogs, jaguars, deer, with holes drilled through their legs and small wheels fitted onto wooden axles. One was found in the tomb of an Aztec child. Around 100 of these wheeled figurines have surfaced across the region. These people understood the wheel and axle perfectly. They put it on children's pull toys. And then they never once scaled it up into a cart. Why? For a long time, people assumed it was ignorance, and that turns out to be flat wrong. These were the same civilizations that tracked the planets and raised stone pyramids. The likeliest answer is brutally practical. They had no animals to pull a cart. No horses, no oxen, no donkeys. None of them existed in the Americas until Europeans brought them over. And a cart with no draft animal in the jungles of the Yucatan or straight up the cliffs of the Andes is worse than useless. The Inca, instead, built some 25,000 miles of stone footpaths and rope bridges, and moved everything on the backs of llamas and men. A few scholars even wonder whether the circle was too sacred to put underfoot, though that one is hard to prove. And here is the twist most people miss about the American story. When the horse finally did arrive with the Spanish, the wheel arrived with it, and it still didn't take over overnight. Old ways are stubborn. To this day, there are corners of the Yucatan and peaks in the Andes that no wheel has ever usefully reached, places you still get to the way the Maya and the Inca did, on your own 2 feet. And it wasn't only the Americas. In the deserts of the Middle East and North Africa, the wheel had a long and useful run. And then it was abandoned. The historian Richard Bulliet famously argued that for centuries, wheeled carts largely vanished from those lands, pushed out by something that handled the sand, and the mountains far better, and needed no roads at all: the camel. For roughly 1,000 years, in the very region where the wheel was born, the future was a camel caravan. The lesson is quiet but sharp. The wheel is not destiny. It only wins where the ground, the animals, and the need all line up. Everywhere else, the smartest people on Earth looked at it and walked. For thousands of years, the wheel stayed roughly the same: wood, spokes, muscle. And then, in a backyard in Belfast, a country vet with a strange idea about a garden hose changed it forever. For most of its life, the wheel was made of wood, and wood is loud and merciless. On stone or cobblestone, an iron-rimmed wheel turned every trip into a bone-rattling ordeal. That was simply how it was, for 5,000 years. The first man to fix it was a Scottish railway engineer named Robert William Thomson. In 1845, at just 23 years old, he patented what he called an aerial wheel, a hoop of rubber filled with air, a cushion laid between the wheel and the road. He even demonstrated it on carriages in a London park. And then it vanished. The world wasn't ready, the rubber was too costly, and Thomson's brilliant idea slipped quietly into oblivion. It took another man, more than 40 years later, who had never heard of Thomson at all. His name was John Boyd Dunlop, a veterinarian in Belfast, Ireland. In 1887, his young son was bumping around on a tricycle with hard rubber tires, complaining about the rough ride. So Dunlop did something that sounds almost absurd. He took a strip of garden hose, glued it into a ring, pumped it full of air, wrapped it in cloth, and fitted it to the boy's wheel. Then he rolled his air-filled wheel and a solid one across the yard together, and only the solid one stopped short. The inflated one just kept going. That backyard tinkering landed at the perfect moment. The bicycle craze was exploding, and cyclists discovered that Dunlop's air tires let them ride faster, farther, and in something close to comfort. The safety bicycle, rolling on Dunlop's air-filled tires, became one of the first machines an ordinary working person could own and steer alone. A small taste of the personal freedom the car would soon hand to everyone. Racers started winning on them almost overnight. Within a few years, there were whole factories. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Without that cushion of air, the automobile as we know it would not exist. A car at speed on solid tires would shake itself, and you to pieces. The entire roaring century of the automobile rolls on an idea a country vet had while feeling sorry for his kid. But every turn has its shadow. The same wheel that built the modern world was strapped to cannons and gun carriages and hauled armies to slaughter on an industrial scale. The same rubber that freed the cyclist would come to depend on plantations worked by forced and brutalized labor in the colonies. The wheel gives and the wheel takes. It always has. And once it was wrapped in air and bolted to an engine, the wheel didn't just move people anymore. It started moving entire nations, their borders, their cities, their populations. If this story is pulling you in, take a second and subscribe. Here at Common Law, We dig up the hidden history behind ordinary things every single week, and you are not going to want to miss where this one goes next. Put the wheel on a steel rail and give it steam, and you get the machine that redrew the map of the world. In the 1800s, railroads laced across whole continents and did something no empire ever had. They collapsed distance. A journey that once took months now took days. Grain from the American Midwest could feed a city 1,000 miles away. Towns were born because a rail line happened to pass through them, and other towns died because it didn't. The Transcontinental Railroad, hammered together across the United States in 1869, tied a fractured young country into a single market almost overnight, and did as much to bind the nation as any law ever passed. There's a famous claim that the width of modern railroad tracks, 4 feet, 8.5 inches, comes straight from the wheel ruts of Roman war chariots. It's a wonderful story, and historians will tell you it's mostly a myth. There was never a single Roman standard, and there's no clean line from a chariot to a locomotive. But the fact that so many people believe it points at something true. We really are still riding on choices made by people long dead, whose names we will never know. Then came the car, and the wheel remade the very shape of how we live. Think of the American landscape and how much of it the automobile built. The suburbs, the interstate highways, the shopping mall, the drive-through, the daily commute, the great family road trip. Entire cities, Los Angeles above all, were poured around the simple assumption that everyone would arrive on 4 wheels. The wheel didn't just move people from town to town. It decided where the towns went, how far apart the houses sat, and what the weekend felt like. Cause and effect, running quietly under everything. A lighter wheel armed empires. A wheel on a rail stitched nations together. A wheel wrapped in air emptied the inner city and filled the suburbs. We think we shaped the wheel. Mostly, the wheel shaped us. And that was all before it left the planet entirely. Today, the wheel is so ordinary that we stopped seeing it. So let's put a number on it. The world now builds somewhere close to 2 billion new tires every single year. And that's not vehicles, that's tires. There are well over 1 billion vehicles rolling around on Earth right now. Every airliner that lands, every subway train, every grocery cart and office chair and suitcase you drag through an airport is riding on a 5,000-year-old idea born in a mine. But here is the part that catches people off guard. Look up. The wheel is one of the most important tools we have in outer space, a place with no roads at all. A satellite or a space telescope can't push off against anything to turn and aim itself. So engineers put spinning wheels inside them, called reaction wheels. Speed the wheel up one way, and the whole spacecraft rotates the other way. That is how the James Webb Space Telescope holds itself dead steady, while it stares at galaxies near the edge of time, with wheels. The same principle a Sumerian cart used to roll to market now points humanity's greatest eye at the beginning of the universe. And it isn't only in orbit. Right now, on the surface of Mars, a car-sized robot named Perseverance is creeping across an alien desert on 6 aluminum wheels. The very same idea, still doing the one job it was born to do, tens of millions of miles from the mine where it started. And look the other direction. Back to that very first use. Wet clay spun on a potter's wheel. That humble spinning disc has descendants everywhere. The turbine spinning in the jet engine over your head. The centrifuge in a hospital lab separating a vial of your blood. The hard drive that spun for decades inside our computers. The flywheel storing energy on the power grid. Every one of them is a child of the wheel. Something spinning fast and true around a fixed center. We took the oldest trick we ever learned and pushed it all the way to the edge of physics. The wheel isn't a relic. It is hiding, right now, inside almost every machine you own. Which brings us back to a dusty plain in Syria, 32 centuries ago. Back at Kadesh, in 1274 BC, nearly 6,000 chariots tore across that plain and settled nothing. Both kings limped home claiming victory. 15 years later, worn out, they signed the first peace treaty in recorded history, and a copy of it hangs today at the United Nations in New York. Empires rose and fell around it, but the little spinning object underneath those war machines never left. It just kept rolling, Think about the journey. It was imagined out of nothing, in a world that had no model for it. It was ignored for almost 300,000 years. It was invented in the dark of a mine. It was rejected by geniuses and traded away for camels. It armed pharaohs and toppled kingdoms. It was wrapped in air by a vet feeling sorry for his son. And then it quietly went to space. Now look down at your own car in the driveway. Look at the wheels on your suitcase, the office chair you're sitting in, the gears turning in the watch on your wrist. The single hardest idea our species ever had to imagine from scratch has become the most invisible thing in your life. And that is what real power looks like in the end. Not the thing everyone stares at. The thing holding everything up so completely and so quietly that nobody remembers it was ever a miracle. If the story of the wheel surprised you, subscribe to Common Lore and tell me in the comments which part hit you hardest. The mine, the toys, or the garden hose. And leave a like so more people can stumble onto this one.